Scholars and readers. When you're writing a research paper, you develop your own ideas first by reading and summarizing and thinking. You look for primary and secondary sources that will support your ideas. You seek out scholarly sources. You identify non-scholarly sources and you use them very carefully. When you write, you choose supporting sources for color or authority, for unusual facts or a countering point of view, and sometimes for a complex idea that you need to paraphrase. You properly introduce each source within the paragraph, and you cite sources in in-text parentheses or footnotes or endnotes, and you include a works cited page or a references page or a bibliography. So this is about this in-text parentheses, footnotes, or endnotes question. What do you choose and why? There are three heavyweights in the citation business. The Modern Language Association, which was developed in 1931, and they were creating a style sheet for the MLA Scholarly Journal. They were trying to tell people who were contributing to that journal how to write and how to format their stuff. The APA was developed a little bit earlier in 1929, and it covers the aspects of scholarly writing most pertinent to writing in psychology, nursing, business, communications, engineering, and related fields. So because a lot of you will be using or be taking classes in these areas, I thought it was important to include the APA, even though the English folks really use the MLA most, or probably you could say exclusively. The third heavyweight in the citation business, and I'm calling it that because they all sell books, and they all have associations, and they all have dues, and they all have ways to earn money by doing what they do. Anyway, the third one is the Chicago Manual of Style, and that's the oldest of the three, founded with the University of Chicago Press. Same deal, they wanted people who were submitting to the press to do things in a proper fashion. And it has had 17 revisions, which include how to handle difficult fonts, how to change, when phototypesetting came in, they changed for that, for word processors, for copyright laws, computers, the web. Essentially, the Chicago Manual of Style has tried to adjust with the kinds of ways that people are writing and the tools people are writing with. All right, so those are the three: MLA, APA, and Chicago. Now let me just give you an example to show you how each of these three ask for a citation. So the APA asks for Edward Said to come, last name, first name, and then the year in which the book was published. And this is, I think, probably a reprint. Anyway, 1994, Culture and Imperialism, and then the city where it was published and the publisher. The MLA has Edward Said, again, Said Edward, first, but the date at which the book was published comes last. The name of the book, the name of the publisher, and then the year it was published. And it no longer requires you to have the city where it was published. Chicago has, again, Said Edward, Culture and Imperialism, again the city, again the publisher, and the year. Now, what do these things say? The APA features the year because the APA is more focused on science. And so you as a reader, when you're choosing the APA, you're featuring the relevant and new discoveries by important people in the field. It emphasizes dates. The MLA and Chicago really emphasize more the important thinkers in the field, people who might have said relevant and new things. And it is really more for the humanities and history. And so in those fields, it matters who you know and it matters who you read. And so the readers are the featured, not the dates. And I could just say, like, somebody important writing about Shakespeare could have written 100 years ago, and it still might be something you need to read. Whereas somebody who said something important about nursing 100 years ago, you don't need to read. You need to stay up, unless you're doing the history of medicine, you need to stay up with the current. So important thinkers kind of last in the humanities, and they don't last as well in the sciences. Okay. So if you're talking to the reader in citations, besides giving credit where credit is due, which is the pardon me, which is the main idea here, that most people emphasize when they teach citations, or adhering to the conventions of your discipline, whether you're in English or whether you're in sciences, besides showing your academic prowess as a scholar, In other words, you're showing your reader that you have in fact done your research and you know your stuff and you've read the right sources. Besides all those three things, which are important and are some of the driving forces of putting citations together, particularly giving credit where credit is due, citations dictate the conversation you are going to have with your reader about sources. What does your reader want and need to know about your sources? The answer to this question determines how you build out the framing and the presentation of your scholarly work. So there are three kinds. In-text citations, which are very brief, and they essentially say, look it up if you want to or you need to. This is where I got my information. Footnotes, which allows you to have two conversations at once because you have a lot to say and you want to talk back to your sources. And endnotes, which keeps sources out of sight but nevertheless accessible. Let's look at all three of those. So first, the citations, the in-text citations. I did this in MLA style here. This is just pretty much straightforward. You want to know where I found that. This is the name of the person. This is the page. Name, page, or the page, right? So you can basically flip back to the works cited and you can find where it is that came from. The assumption is that there's a kind of a one-to-one relationship between you and your sources. You agree with your sources support you. This is where you found it. That's what in-text citations do. Now, how about the footnote? The footnote's a different animal. The footnote is kind of like two screens before there were screens. The footnote is for people who want to hold 2 or 3 conversations at once. So you have a footnote and you look down and you see that you have an additional commentary on that number 1. So you can say, if you want to know more about that, you can read White, but you can also see this other person who said something similar. Right? Our second footnote says, here's where I found that, but if you want to have an opposing viewpoint, you could look at this other source right here. So footnote 2 allows you to have a conversation that tells the reader other people disagree with this, and here's where to go for that information. Footnote 3 is a kind of an author's commentary. It's not something the author is going to include in the main argument, but they just want to tell you this thing. So for instance, we had that Maureen O'Connell commenting on her home support for epilepsy, and then the author says, hey, there's only one of these agencies that help clients in this, and this is a surprising lack across the U.S. Only 25 agencies in total supporting epileptic patients, right? So this is a very different relationship to sources. This is, here's more, here's different, here's my opinion. So unsurprisingly, I love this style because I work in history mostly when I'm not working in English, and historians just want to talk a lot about their ideas and about their sources. And so this is when you have a brain that's just activated on all levels and you just want to talk and you have lots of conversations to have. The footnotes are for that. You may have been taught footnotes as just, another style, and they are another style, but they're another style that does something particular and important, and it allows you to have this kind of depthy, sort of jazzy conversation with your sources, back and forth, kind of riffing on a note or talking about more things. Okay. The endnote. The endnote is for writers who are telling a story to people who may or may not be scholars. So the writer doesn't want to interrupt the narrative flow, but they do want to say what they know their stuff, and if you want to know it, here's where to find it. Some great authors here are often journalists turned historians. Charles Mann, Mark Kurlansky, both have really fine, very good public histories of things like 1491 and 1493, before and after Columbus. That's Charles Mann. Mark Kurlansky has a great book on salt and on cod. He tells big global stories, another one on paper, about how these things were developed and how they moved across the world. And they assume that their readers don't want to see all the footnotes right in front of them and don't want to have endless notes in the text. But they do think that their readers would be interested to know more about it. And so they'll say, and endnotes, here's more about that information, here's more about that information, here's more about that information. They all go in the endnotes because the endnotes are the way to keep this kind of stuff straight for the reader and allow the reader who is interested to learn more. So after you have thought long and hard about your ideas, and after you have found sources to support and supplement and embellish your ideas, then you give credit where credit is due, adhering to the conventions of your discipline, that is choosing MLA, APA, or Chicago, and you show your academic prowess as a scholar by showing what you have read and learned, and you've earned your credibility in the conversation, then you need to decide what kind of conversation you want to have with your reader about your sources. What does your reader want to need to know about your sources? And the answer to this question determines whether you choose in-text citations, footnotes, or endnotes.